Go ahead and post the Facebook thing while I'm working on this. Post the Facebook thing while I'm working on this.
Oh, okay. I can do that.
Turn your mic way down. You're peaking every time you type a letter.
Let's see. That better?
I don't know yet.
That better?
You're still peaking. Turn on your camera.
Zach, is this better volume-wise? Okay, well, now I can't hear you because I turned the overall volume down, so I had to figure out where to do the mic. All right. Hello. I cannot see. I don't have video on my end, Zach. Are we not gonna get it? Okay. I'm going to it right now. Hello, everyone. For those of you who are confused as to what's happening, I am in St. Louis for the winter break, and am conferencing in for Composer Talk from 8 hours away from Norman, Oklahoma.
Also,
So-
really quick, my intro didn't go through, so we're gonna restart really quick. Hello, welcome to Composer Talk again. I had the mic muted a couple seconds ago because I was working on stuff beforehand. But anyways, so as Jacob just explained, he is elsewhere. I am here though in my studio. So we've, as he mentioned, conferenced him in, and well, his Skype is a terrible program, and he doesn't own Discord like smart people. So what we've done is I've represented him as best I can with this Mirage.
That is, and I do not say this lightly, the worst picture of me that I have ever seen in my life.
Well, there are no good pictures, so all right.
So
We've got a lot of actually a lot of industry news this week. It was a very industrious week for news this week. Really? Nothing? Okay, I thought it was funny. All right.
I'm trying to. Unfortunately, I'm trying to get everything together after our tumultuous beginnings. But yes, news this week. I think first on our list, I can get it pulled up here. It is just kind of a fun little item. Apparently, corporate orchestras are starting to be a thing. And there was an article that came out. It was on Yahoo, but it's a Yahoo article that it's actually becoming a German tradition to have corporate orchestras, where a company essentially gets a bunch of their people together and gets an orchestra and plays Beethoven and whatnot. This is big in Germany and Asia, and I just saw something, another Yahoo article that popped up on my Facebook feed today, that Amazon is now doing the same thing. There is an Amazon corporate orchestra where their employees get together to play music. In theory, this is supposed to promote camaraderie, teach teamwork and effective responses to coworkers. So it's a corporate use of the long-held notion, I think an accurate notion, that music and playing music with others is a valuable teacher of teamwork and cooperation, aside from music's inherent beneficial qualities of beauty and like that. It also teaches us things. So companies are catching on to this.
They are, but I think this actually has other implications, because I think it shows that in places that we least expect, we have allies, so to speak. You know, for instance, this is a great instance of, a lot of these cases there was probably a CEO somewhere in one of these companies that was like, you know what, I like music, why don't we have music? Let's do it because it's good for camaraderie, all that. Because it didn't just pop up for camaraderie, because honestly, there's much more, I guess, effective solutions to developing camaraderie than using the, art of music making. But you also see it in other things, such as, you see a lot of filmmakers and TV show writers who are very invested in classical music. I can hear everything you type, by the way. Anyways, yes,
sorry.
I can hear everything. But, yeah, so that's actually something really important to keep in mind, that, maybe your family, maybe your close friends, maybe people in your house or whatever don't necessarily understand what you're working on, but you have fans somewhere. You just have to find them.
Well, and I don't know how much of an opportunity this is for composers necessarily, but I think it is good, and I don't know. We might have some some anti-corporate listeners who would have some negative things to say about this. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you can what?
I'm surprised you don't have something negative to say with it.
Well, you know, I don't really. I mean, I'm not. I'm no. We won't go into my political views right now. I'm no communist, but I mean, I am as skeptical as, you know, as any one of the intentions of large corporations. But at the same time, I think we have to realize that people, you know, people who run these companies are still people, and I think that although you can look at things with a cynical eye, I think it's ultimately a good thing. I mean, it's music being made in a setting that and some of these companies, I'm sure, are great places to work, and it's a setting that has not traditionally been thought of as conducive to, I guess creativity. You think of the popular image of, you know, you go to work, you know, at your big company, and you have to sit at your desk job and do what you're told. I guess I think that the cynical attitude might be, well, this is just a way of companies distracting their employees from the.
Okay. At that point, we're gonna move on before we get too deep into that.
I mean, no. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, yes, you can look at it that way, but ultimately, I think that whenever music is being made and people are enjoying it, that's a good thing.
Right.
And yeah.
So another item on our dock this week that is not really related at all, but just going into the opposite end of things. The Federal Court of Appeals upheld the fractional licensing argument. Are you familiar with what was going on here?
Yes.
Yeah, so basically, for those that don't know, sorry about that noise for headphone users, but basically, the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals has actually upheld that people like ASCAP can survive. And for those that don't, this is something that has kind of been not major news lately because, I mean, honestly, it's just kind of been in the background, like, oh, this probably won't happen, but something that's been looked into. But effectively, they were looking into, oh, we should make it to where it's not possible for people like ASCAP, BMI to do kind of universal licensing that would cover a composer's entire repertory, or, you know, a collection of works, or even, you know, a suite of works. And it would basically, A, make a lot more paperwork for us, B, it would actually reduce our payout potential from ASCAP, BMI, etc. And finally, if it would have been dismantled, it may have actually done more long-term harm, but that's not stuff that we'll go into today. But if you want, you can go look it up. There's several articles on this. There's one on the ASCAP website. There's one on Billboard. But yeah, I totally recommend going to read, just so you know a little bit about what might have happened. But basically, good news, it didn't happen. So, yay.
And well, I mean, fractional licensing is important because it allows all parties involved in the creation of a song or a piece of music to benefit from that. And also, right. One of the
not just the majority. Yeah.
One of the things that the Billboard article brought out is that it requires, for that licensing to go into effect, it requires the consent of, the example that was given, if there are 3 songwriters who worked on a song, you know, like a popular song, then under fractional licensing, you have to get all of the songwriters' consent to license it for play on radio and things like this.
Yep.
And a lot of I guess radio stations and other music distribution companies, I guess you could say, the licensors rather than the licensees, wanted this law to be struck down because it would make it easier for them to get access to music. And while that's understandable, I think from a songwriter's and a composer's perspective, I think all of us kind of want to have control over, some degree of control, at least our consent given to the distribution and dissemination of our own works. So yes, it's a good thing. ASCAP was definitely in favor of this decision. There's a short celebratory note on their page.
Yes, and again, I totally recommend looking at it because ASCAP puts a nice positive spin on it. from kind of more the composer's perspective, but the Billboard article looks at it more from the industry perspective. So if you want the best overall outlook, I recommend looking at both, but at least read one so that you're informed and you know kind of what happened, because we don't want to go into the details here because we'd be here all day and we're already 14 minutes into the show. So, do you want to take this next one?
Yeah, I'm trying to think where we're at. Oh yes, another more fun item. A orchestra in Korea, South Korea, not North Korea, just broke the Guinness World Record for the world's largest orchestra. This ensemble was made up of, I think, mostly church musicians from a large variety of churches in South Korea, and they played a couple classical pieces, some hymn arrangements. Their performance as a whole only lasted, I think, about 10 minutes, but it was massive and broke the record. Not so. Composers out there wanting to write for 8,000 musicians, it can be done. Maybe not often, but
yeah. And just for a visual for everyone, I am gonna transition to the page for it. I mean, that is just like, I often get made fun of by people like Jacob for being the king of overdoing and like one-upping and maximizing everything. I wouldn't have done this, and I'm the king of maxing things out. Like, so if that tells you anything about how nuts it is.
You're telling me if you got the opportunity to write for an 8,000 piece orchestra, you would not do it?
I would not, only because can you imagine the amount of time it would take to transcribe that? To actually make sure that, oh, it's actually necessary to have 8,000. Like, that's the part that makes me...
I mean, presumably you would have sections, right? Large, and on Sibelius and Dorico, you can simply extract your parts.
You can, however, part extraction has only come so far. Now, yeah, Dorico's made a lot of strides to make sure that part extraction is much more, not really perfect, but much more ready to go than Sibelius and Finale, but honestly, it's still not, it's not up to my standards yet, but that's again because I do a lot of this professionally, so...
I guess my point is if you have an 8,000 piece orchestra, I'm not envisioning, you split them up into your first violins, your second and your third, and your... I'm just thinking, well, rather you have, 500 first violins. So you're not necessarily dealing with 4 parts.
Yes, but then you actually have to think from the do you need it perspective. And this is something that I work with a lot, actually this past semester, because I wrote a lot of improvisatory and minimalist music this semester. I don't know why, I just did. Maybe I was just feeling weird. But what I ended up having to fuss with a lot is, okay, how do I justify that this needs, like for instance, the dice piece, how do I justify that this needs at least 2 to 5 players, if not up to 8? Why would 9 be inherently worse than 8? Etc., etc. And I couldn't just use arbitrary things like, 8 people's all that can fit around a table, because you actually have to think about, okay, like, even if you look at more classically written music, things like, a string orchestra or something. There's a lot of people that just take string quartet music and play it in a string orchestra. It doesn't sound right.
Right.
And much the same way, my latest symphony, Immortal, it would not sound good with this 8,000 piece orchestra, because there's no way they could play piano. There is zero way. Like, that many instruments, if you even have a third of the first violins play pianissimo, it's going to come out as and it's going to be like, oh, I can't do anything.
Right, but if you are writing specifically for that large an ensemble, you're going to write differently than you. So I guess my point is, I guess I'm envisioning not adapting an existing piece, but writing just kind of, I guess, a short orchestral fanfare or something. I mean, I would do it.
Nah.
To write for 8,000 musicians, I would do it.
As the king of overkill, as far as composition and all that goes, even I can't say that that's a good idea. If you want to do it, it's your own funeral.
I mean, I'm not getting commissioned to do this anytime soon that I know of. So I mean, but,
Yeah. Well,
but, you know,
let's move on past the gargantuan orchestra. Like, just one more little visual for you guys. Sorry, Jacob, I'm going to cover up your face, but it's not like they're missing anything right now. Just that is a ridiculous orchestra.
Picture, no, then that definitely not.
Yeah, like that is a ridiculous orchestra. Like your face is the orchestra right now. That is that orchestra. Oh. All right, so I guess I'll take this next one. So SoundCloud, as I've mentioned before on the show, over the summer, basically SoundCloud not started but leaped into the decline, and their latest kind of gimmick to try and get more and more people into the system is they're actually adding, I think they're on all social media platforms now, not just Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. They're actually integrated into little tiny social media things now, like all the little niche things that only these people would use. No, they're integrated into it. They're trying desperately, and I think that this is possibly a last-ditch effort by SoundCloud to matter, because SoundCloud has been on the decline, especially now that ASCAP and BMI have reached an agreement with YouTube. It's very hard to argue for the existence of SoundCloud, let alone paying for it. I mean, the only reason why I'm paying for it right now is because I have a few recordings on there that are linked into my website that I'm still working on migrating over. But once I'm done with that, I'm done with SoundCloud, because they're toast at this point. But anyways, so I think that first of all, I think this would have been great half a year ago. If they would have done this at the beginning of summer, just before or just after the massive layoffs, I would have been all for it. But this is coming really late. This is too little too late, in my opinion, despite how good it is to have social media integration. But do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, is this a last-ditch effort?
Oh, I mean, with SoundCloud, I mean, they've been kind of on the fritz for a while, and I think you really are looking at here just whether fortunately or not. I mean, it's business. I mean, SoundCloud really has, as far as what it does for musicians. I mean, it really doesn't do anything more than YouTube does. I think we're just looking at, you know, the wheels of business turning. I do know there's actually this is something that's happened more in the popular music world, but there's been a debate going on for years about SoundCloud versus Bandcamp. And for those of you who don't know, Bandcamp is essentially it's a site where musicians can store their music and sell it and stream it. And Bandcamp is something I actually recommend. I haven't used it extensively, but I know people who have, and it's something I actually recommend for composers who have bought into the more, I guess the model derived more from popular music, where you actually are making albums and making your own recordings and trying to sell them. Bandcamp's a great venue for this, because Bandcamp actually gives you the option to have it streamed, so that people can sample the music, but it also has the buy button sitting right above that makes you feel really guilty about not buying the album. And a lot of rock musicians use it, and some composers as well. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that well for those of us who haven't worked as much in that selling albums model that some composers have moved to.
Well, actually, even with that, I'm actually kind of against Bandcamp on this. I mean, I know a lot of very successful composers, close friends even, that have used Bandcamp rather extensively, but honestly, not enough people actually buy the music to actually justify kind of the exposure loss. Because I look at posting your stuff on Bandcamp as a waste of time, because it's just exposure loss. You will get more hits, and I've I've proven this kind of on the back end, but I see Bandcamp and SoundCloud kind of on the same parallel as far as findability of new music, new composers that you're not familiar with. But, you know, I see, like, for instance, you can't really just discover something new on those platforms. You kind of have to target where you're searching for. Whereas YouTube, for instance, and this is coming from someone who long was against using YouTube for this stuff, but YouTube actually links you to, hey, you might like this video. Hey, you might like that video. Why? Because you both said string orchestra, Einstein, and Pickles. So, therefore, they're related. That would be a weird string quartet. But,
and I think
Pickles!
that will be explored last week with Spotify, that kind of on the opposite end, that these platforms are kind of manipulating listeners into diving deeper in their own preferences rather than exploring broadly. But I mean, from a composer's perspective, I mean that really is the problem with something like Bandcamp. The only people who use Bandcamp are people who are A, musicians, or B, really into the music scene, and it's the kind of people who scour Bandcamp to find new bands. It really doesn't have as broad of an audience as well say YouTube, where something can, as you pointed out, kind of be connected through tenuous lines to anything, and you can reach a bit of a wider audience. Now, I don't necessarily think I think that a savvy composer could use both in tandem, because Bandcamp kind of gives you an existing platform to actually sell your music, whereas YouTube can work not against that, but with it to disseminate it in a way that gets out to a larger audience. But you can also sell your music from your own website, if you have a website that can do that. So I don't know. I don't have a particular thing against Bandcamp. It doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon, but that is mostly because of its use among popular musicians rather than composers. Just because, well, composers don't all tend to fall into the same make a recording and sell it kind of mentality.
Right. And I think, I don't know, I think beyond that, it's just, kind of returning to the topic here, regardless of how effective the platform is, I think it's just clear that platform doesn't work right, because keep in mind, the main reason why SoundCloud is dying is because they couldn't find a way to make money. Like, they had all these investors, they had all this, and they had 6 years, and they weren't able to turn a profit in those 6 years. They weren't able to find a way to make it profitable. So, and I imagine that Bandcamp is in similar waters. However, Bandcamp never did the rapid growth. Bandcamp just kind of stayed still. And as a result, they were able to organically grow. And as a result, I don't think Bandcamp will die. I just, I don't think it's going to grow anymore. Whereas SoundCloud, they tried to rise too high without making a profit, and then down the toilet for them. But I don't know. So it's just an interesting implication. What I think was a fairly beloved, streaming service for composers is, honestly, I think they have a matter of months left. At this point, I am personally recommending, I would say by April, have your music off of SoundCloud. If you have any recordings that you made directly to SoundCloud, get it off of there now. If that is what you use with your website, with your social media, etc., I cannot stress this enough. I totally recommend just getting your stuff off of it, because and this kind of thing too is definitely, it's just kind of, I see writing on the wall type thing. Like, it's about to be game over for SoundCloud. So, and I hate to say that as someone that loved the service, but I don't know. On to something more positive. Do you want to take this next one?
This is more. We might not be working off the same sheet because of our
Oh, because you can't sync to it right now. Okay. The recorded music industry thing.
I'll talk about net neutrality. You take this one.
Okay. So, I'll actually go ahead and mention net neutrality because that's just more of a yay.
We're not. No, not. I mean, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about this. But most of you listening probably know that net neutrality was repealed by the FCC this past week. Now, for those of you who support net neutrality, don't panic yet. It's still possible for Congress to override the FCC on this. The new regulations do not go into effect immediately. But it is something that the FCC did vote to do. So we may be seeing the demise of net neutrality within this next year.
Well,
and that's go ahead then.
Oh, what I was going to say is that, I mean, it is very important to keep that in mind. I mean, yeah, it is. It's very depressing to see net neutrality go. I know why it is being attacked by a lot of politicians, mainly because A, they don't understand it, B, I mean, there have been problems with net neutrality. I will not say there weren't problems, but you know, I have to say overall it's just kind of, it just falls into line with what a lot of the United States administration is doing right now, which is, oh, instead of fixing this thing, we're just going to throw it away because it's easier.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, it's like 80% there. You just need to fix the last 20%, and it would have been fine. Like, really, all they needed to do was fix the part where ISPs could not give, like, criminal information to a federal investigation. Like, that's literally the one part they needed to fix. Because that was the one part that was very broken about net neutrality. But it's just like, they decided to attack the whole thing instead, and it's just like, how did they come to this conclusion?
Well, I don't really have a set opinion on this. I mean, I don't feel that I've studied in enough depth to really speak with authority on the issue. There are good some good articles about it online. I'm trying to think of a good one that's pro net neutrality repeal. I haven't had the chance to read extensively on the subject, but I mean, honestly, I would encourage myself and also our listeners to go and read up on this a bit, because it does affect us as musicians, as people who are putting our music out there over the internet. We want people to be able to access it, and of course the danger with the net neutrality repeal is that people are going to have to pay extra to access probably some of the sites where we keep our music, whether that be the unfortunately declining SoundCloud or YouTube or even social media, like Facebook and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, and the way I see this possibly negatively affecting us is, I see it more from my side. I'm much more techie. I'm also more on the back end. Like, I host my own servers, and I host people, like Jacob's website. I host my website. I host about 5 other composers' websites and a slew of other ones, and I can't imagine what's going to happen if I end up having to get charged more, because right now I charge basically dirt. Like, I don't know, like, this would really affect, because, for instance, if you're using a small service like, let's just say Bandcamp, because Bandcamp is considered a small service compared to something like YouTube. Let's just say that next time you log in or try to log into Bandcamp, you see, okay, Bandcamp, you want access this is $2 a month. Like, how would that make you react, Jacob?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't make me react.
Well, yeah.
But no, I think you have to look at this, and this is something I think internet hero Cory Doctorow mentioned in his book. His book "Information Doesn't Want to Be Free" is the name of the book. He essentially said, if we're talking unrestrained capitalism here with competition out the wazoo, and you have 20 different internet service providers trying to vie for the customer's dollar. Not having net neutrality isn't as much of an issue, because
it'll keep it within reason.
Right. With corporations that have to compete, they're going to have incentive to give the customer what they want at a reasonable price. However, we don't. Not every area of the United States has a lot of competition with regard to ISPs, and ISPs, at least in his argument, as he said, have protections from the federal government apart from net neutrality regulations, similar to those that utility companies do, and that with these protections that kind of limit competition among ISPs, net neutrality is necessary to kind of balance out the lack of competition that the government has built into the system. Now, if you're someone like me, you might just say, well, burn it all down, restrained capitalism. But I mean, that's not really what we're dealing with right now. I mean, we have to work with what we have. So, yeah, it's something to keep in mind, something to read up on, and if you decide that you agree with many Americans that this would negatively affect us as composers and internet culture in general, I mean, feel free to contact your representatives and such, because I mean the debate isn't over. Congress still has a say in this, so keep informed and act accordingly.
And then also importantly, this is just a side note on this, and this goes slightly beyond the scope of this show, but I feel like I'm being a good steward by mentioning it. There have been a lot of fake things about net neutrality out there. Fake things as in, like, fake reviews. So someone steals Jacob's personal identity and goes online and says, my name is Jacob Frost, I'm a composer living in Oklahoma, and I think net neutrality is bad because XYZ. People are actually doing that, and there are many fraudulent cases of that. Not just of living people, but of dead people, etc. So if you... It only takes a few minutes. There's actually a federally run search site that you can go to. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but if you do a quick Google search, you can find it. And you can just type your name in, and you can state whether or not you've actually said anything about net neutrality yet. And if you have, you can say when you did, and it will actually screen out and tell you how many times your name has been used in comments regarding it. Because keep in mind, the FCC and all that, all government agencies, they rely more and more on internet comment threads. And this is very dangerous now, because it's very possible that net neutrality got swung over, so to say, by people stealing people's identities. And that's very scary, because this is actually very rampant. It's not just one or two cases. It's thousands. So check that out. It would take you 5 minutes out of your day, but I think every responsible American citizen should do that. Just spend 5 minutes and do that, because that's very important, and it'll hopefully help sway things the other direction. Particularly if it's found that even 10% of those comments were fake. That's enough to think that the whole thing's a mess. But anyways, so I digress. Sorry for going beyond the scope of the show, but that's my good citizen for the day.
I'd like to get to our... I know there might be a couple other small news on it. Since we're far enough into the show, I'd actually like to get into our discussion topic for today, if you don't mind.
Yeah, we can go ahead and do that. Go ahead and introduce it.
Yeah. So something I've been thinking a lot about lately, is music's relationship with language, and I don't mean this in the sense of language as in setting a text, although it might be related. What I mean is music a language? We often hear music talked about as being a language that has the power to communicate things that go beyond words. But is this really an accurate way of viewing music? And I think part of it gets down to, is music even capable of really communicating external ideas, whether that be emotional or somehow other referential? to me, and Zach, feel free to chime in here, but to me, uh, there's a distinction between saying music is a language, which to me implies that music can communicate external ideas, in a way similar to the way words do, if not exactly the same. And saying on the other hand that music is like a language, it's analogous to one, not necessarily that it communicates external ideas, but that it communicates its own ideas, purely musical ideas, in a way that is similar to how language works. What's your take on this, Zach? Yeah.
Well, I actually, I really do think it is, and just for simplicity's sake, let's take music without words, just so that we're not taking the gray areas, all
Right,
that stuff.
let's really
Um,
talk about.
I have said for years and years and years that the best music does not need words or lyrics because music, in my opinion, actually, if used correctly, has the ability to express more than what we can with any written or spoken language. And that's something that I have thought for years and years, and I get criticized by that opinion sometimes because I legitimately do think that I mean this is a harsh way of putting it, but in general I just think that using lyrics, that's cheating. I think that you should be able I think you should be able to convey your ideas without it.
Oh,
And I know it's not the most popular of opinions, but it does really resonate, especially with this topic, because I mean, personally, if I feel that I have written something that conveys, let's just say, dread of an upcoming event, and I don't have to say that. All I have to do is give them a title saying, let's just say I call something sacrifice, and they get like a story arc in there of, oh wow, this music, it's about sacrificing things that you don't even have and that other people don't understand, and that you go beyond that until you've sacrificed every bit of your being, and still you aren't recognized by those that you sacrificed everything for. I think that if I can write a piece of music like that with that title without any program notes, any of that, and people are able to get that story, I feel that that proves that music is not only a language, I think it is the best language. The best language.
okay, Zach, but people, yeah, let's go back to your dread example. Just keep it simple. You write something that you intended to convey a feeling of dread. That doesn't mean that your audience is going to feel a feeling of dread. They might feel something different. They might feel power. Um, they might feel uh, I don't know, energy or eager anticipation. Um, I feel that I don't think. Let me clarify here. You can write something that you intend to convey a specific idea, but that doesn't mean that idea is what's going to get across to the audience. And I think that if you talk to audience members, about your music, they are all going to experience it differently. Um, the a good example from this, I kind of side with, and I don't know if you've read this person, but there's a 19th century aesthetician, a music critic named Edward Hanslick, who wrote a great book called The Beautiful in Music, and he made one of the best points anyone has ever made in the history of aesthetic criticism. Music doesn't actually convey emotion, technically. What music does is music. I do think that music can imitate things that go on in the world, but it doesn't imitate emotion per se. It imitates motion without the e. When you read a passage, I mean, let's think about what a passage that conveys dread is like. I mean, you might have a bit, just your most cliche level here, big booming um, gradually crescendoing passage in the bass drum or in the basses. You might have some intense string tremolos, stuff like this. What you're doing is you're conveying an actual something actually physical, throbbing, or a ringing sound in your ears, something like this, that can be associated with more than one emotion. Because
it can, however, just like they're kind of like whenever I speak to you, if I say, let's just take my favorite phrase, derp. If I say derp, that's very different than derp or derp. Like, those are three very different derps that if you hang out with me enough, you know that all three of those, I said three very different things. One of them was not very friendly, one of them was I'm an idiot, and the other one was what are you doing? Like, and that's stuff that, I mean, yeah, that's a bit more niche case, but I'm going to use it because it's just funny, because I love that word. But I think that just like different inflections, different ways of doing the word, because each word you can put inflections on in hundreds of ways. And I think very much the same in a piece of music. You know, if I have a line of music that goes, let's just say, da 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 da, that's very different than da 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 da. Very, very different. Now, I think where you can create the language is in creating the layers of this. It's not just, oh, convey this feeling of dread. You've got to really paint that picture, and this is something that I think we have to look at our colleagues in the film and video game industries of composing, because they have already mastered this building of suspense. Like, let's just look at, for instance, we just saw The Last Jedi last week. I've seen it a couple more times, but yes, it is phenomenal movie. I recommend seeing it 50,000 times. Literally all other movies are irrelevant now. But, I mean, there are certain musical moments in there that, just like with all of Star Wars, you take away the music, and the words are there, and you understand what's happening, but you don't feel the weight until you hear that little bit of brass followed with, like, the strings driving, and then it's just like, oh, that had a lot of implication. Oh, man. And you know, if you take away the dialogue, even if you do what I do and just listen to the soundtrack over and over sometimes, you can literally get all the emotional weight that you got from watching the movie by just sitting and listening to the soundtrack. And not universally, but I think the fact that you can do that for significant portions, or even in some cases the majority of certain movies, I think that proves that language and music, I mean, they really are one and the same, and in some cases, music really does come out on top.
Zach, I think that that really cuts against your point more than it proves it.
How so?
Because you can talk about when you talk about listening to the soundtrack and it conveying the weight of the movie, you're speaking that as somebody who's seen the movie, so you already have those associations in your mind.
I will give you that point.
Right, and I think that this point, I don't necessarily. Yeah, I'll put it this way. You've talked about how composers can learn from concert composers can learn from film composers in the past, and I think yes, we can, but you're talking about film music, and it's something that contributes to a larger whole. And yes, it does. We do perceive it as carrying a lot of emotional weight, but it carries emotional weight in partnership with the action, with the dialogue, with the acting on stage. And if you think about music simply as it is, sounds purely do not have emotional content. The emotion, the emotional content of music really comes from, I believe, really comes to how we respond from it. And I don't think that your description of how you can build up a piece of music and manipulate that material in different ways really disproves my point. sound still is not inherently emotional, and I do think that
It can be crafted to be emotional, though.
I do think, but it's crafted to be emotional to you. If you're writing it, you might associate something with it. What I would recommend is, next time you write a piece of music, get and you have it performed without suggesting anything to the audience. Get their feedback on what they felt when that music was played, and do this even without, because earlier you talked about putting a title to the music that kind of gave the theme, but that is also partnering words with music. You're using a word or a phrase to tell your audience what to feel when they listen to the piece. Whereas
You've
if
given
you
me an
play
idea,
something-
though. You've given me
What?
an idea. What if let's just say there is an event that is not focused on concerts. What if at said event that is just a gathering of composers, what if I were to just field test a piece of music without a title and see what people felt from it? That's kind of a thought experiment. And if I could get them to, I want to say at least 60% line up with what I'm trying to convey, would you consider that experiment a success?
No, well, it
What
depends
percentage? Because you can't have universal. I mean, that's impossible to have 1000% universal. So I mean, what margin of error are you willing to give me if I'm willing to try and take this on as an experiment? Which maybe I will.
If there's a number, but you realize that showing one piece to 5 people also is not.
I'm not saying 5 people.
Would prove any. Here's and I think it would be useful. I mean, and I do think that because of the way music has evolved to be perceived in our culture, in part because of its partnership with film, there is more agreement, I think, among listeners on what maybe a certain piece may be communicating, than there would be if we dropped a bunch of people from different cultures into a pit and made them listen to something that had not necessarily had the experience of music being associated with particular emotions within the context of film or commercials or TV shows or what have you. But I think that would be a useful experiment. And I think with some pieces you'd probably get more agreement, and with some you'd get less. I mean, it depends on how distinctive you're being in your depiction of something that's been depicted before in music.
And that is the key. You have to be as distinctive as possible. I can't just half truck it and call that a success.
So you're saying you don't want emotional nuance in your music?
No, I do. No, I do. What I'm saying is I can't half truck it. I can't just almost get the nuance. I've got to nail it. I've got to sit there and craft. Like, for instance, whenever I sit there and do electronic music, I compose it by the millisecond sometimes. Because that's just what's necessary. You've got to do that within acoustic music.
Here's the thing that people are going to naturally associate. Something that sounds like similar to the Imperial March, by example. What I'm trying to say is that music that sounds similar to that, people are going to naturally associate with a sense of ominousness and evil. Not necessarily because of anything inherent in the music itself, although I do think the music lends itself to that interpretation, even though it might not exclusively lend itself to that interpretation. But because of movies like Star Wars and other movies that have used similar effects, people have been trained to hear certain kinds of passages in that way.
Okay.
It's not necessarily something inherent in the music itself, it's our cultural associations that we have with it.
Okay, then let me poke something at you. Why is a house called a house? It's not a house. We called it a house.
Right.
So that's association. We have associated the word house with my house. We've associated, pen with this. We've associated light I mean, this isn't. There's nothing in the laws of the universe that says this is a pen. But we have designated this as a pen and use that in our language. So I think in a very similar way, we have built up music as a language because we now have associations. You know, we have things. Well, let's just say we have the hallmarks of music. We have things like, you know, Beethoven 5 and the Imperial March and Eine kleine Nachtmusik and, March to the Gallows. Like, a whole bunch of things that are just universally part of the musical language that, I mean, keep in mind, there was a study done several years ago, and across the world, even with people that had never seen a Star Wars movie, they recognized the Imperial March, and they knew what it meant.
I realize there have been many more studies done that have basically disproven the idea that music is a universal language.
Yes, however, I tend to limit myself more to. I mean, just like with most studies, you are supposed to look into it, you're supposed to get what you need from it, and I think that it's possible. I think it's entirely possible that music as a language, just like, you know, we've constructed the English language, the French language, the German language, it's built of a bunch of components and parts and words that are associated with different meanings, different structures. You know, webcam is associated with this is a pen, etc. But what if, like, let's just take the idea of leitmotifs, for instance. I mean, those are musical ideas that are associated with a person. I mean, if you were to associate that to objects as well, then in 20 years, there could be a 3-note musical riff that is just universally known as, oh, that means someone's picking up a pen.
I actually, and you're going to be very surprised, I actually agree with you. Yes, it would be possible, just as, I mean, words, it's true, words don't have inherent meaning. We over time, we associate them with certain things. So, it would be possible to have a language similar to English or Chinese or any spoken language now that was simply composed of musical notes. However, I do agree with your point, and I do think, and I mean, I've said that people, at least we'll say in Western culture, to get away from the universality idea here, but will have come to associate certain sounds with certain emotions or ideas. However, I think that thinking of music primarily in that way actually sells music short. And here's why. In Aaron Copland, in one of his books, he talked about how we listen to music, and he posited kind of 3 ways that we tend to do this. And the first one is the purely sensory. This is just going to a party, hearing a pop song, and oh, it sounds cool. It's just on a very surface level pleasing to the senses.
You're going robot. You need to repeat the last 2 sentences.
What did you say?
You went robot. You need to repeat the last 2 sentences.
The audio.
Yes.
What I was saying is that what Copeland was saying, that we can listen to music, number one, on a purely sensory level, where just on a surface level the music gives pleasure to our senses. The second way he talked about listening to music is what we're talking about right now, which he called the emotional level, but I prefer to call the associative level, because as I talked about earlier with the Hans Licht's argument, music doesn't really inherently express emotions, but it does have the potential to imitate things in the world, things that move, and in that way we can associate not simply emotions, but like you're talking about, people, objects, and that kind of thing with music. But the third way of listening to music, and the way that I think a lot of people fail to do, is the purely musical level, where you're simply appreciating music for its purely musical qualities. Not how it makes you feel, not the associations that it gives you, but the simple craft of putting sounds together to create something beautiful. And Zach, I think that's the aspect of the music that you're missing when you talk about music as an emotional language. I don't necessarily disagree with you that it can do that, in an associative manner, not in a manner of inherently communicating emotions, as we've talked about. But I don't think that's its primary purpose. And I think any manner of listening to music that reduces its value to uh, expressing emotion sells short the formal beauty of music, its purely musical qualities. That to me are what makes music purely special and something different, really different from a spoken language. I don't
Well,
necessarily think it's better, but something that's distinct, and capable of creating beauty in a completely different way.
well, I'll close with this. I see your point. However, again, to me at least, creating something that is musically pleasing, formally correct, and really fun to listen to, that's just a great, well-rounded piece of music. For me, that's level one. I think the next step is creating that emotional connection that you cannot have with any other art form, any other language, any other combination of them. There are
I
some
mean, that
things that I believe are basically for me. I guess maybe this is the way that we're thinking about it. That's inverted. Is I see it as you get the musicality, then you add the emotion. But it seems to me like what you're doing is you have the emotion, and then you have to add the musicality.
not really. I think that when you create a piece of music, as a composer, my concern is primarily purely musical, and I think that the emotional content of that music, when I write, is something that is up to be interpreted by the listener. I'm not saying that I don't take emotion into account when I write. I mean when I come up with a melody, I often think about it as expressing something in particular. But that's not something that I think the audience should be beholden to. I think it's my interpretation of the music that I write that can have that that can be interpreted in many different ways by the audience.
Right.
And I mean, ultimately, I don't think it's fair to talk about music as if it's a higher form of emotional expression than any other art. I think that a lot of connoisseurs of many different types of arts would disagree with you, and I think that as a musician, that might be something that you tend to think. But I don't see how music is inherently capable of being more emotionally expressive than, well, literature or painting, or any other of the arts. I mean, of course, music does have its strengths, and I think one of its strengths is that it's abstract in a way that allows the audience to identify it with it more than one way emotionally. Whereas a book, or a movie is a little more concrete in what it's expressing. I don't necessarily think that's superior. It's simply different. Um, yeah.
Personally, for me, I see it as I guess not truly superior, but I just think it's a great level that perhaps other art forms have. I think it's something unique to music that we are able to go between the different forms. We are able to express things like that because, and again, this is just because I guess this is a long founded thing. And again, I'll try to close with this because we're a little past time, but I truly do feel that music as something that is unique to humans. As far as we know, we have discovered sentient life elsewhere. Music to humans is the thing that is unique, and that other things have language, other things use math, etc. But music is something that we have that is unique, and I think that the reason why it is so special is because, yes, music by itself is inherently special, but it is able to convey, at least in my opinion, it is able to convey, and you can't disagree with the fact that it's able to convey all these emotions. It's able to portray a story. It's able to create a character portrait. It is able to create a soundscape of a world that you could never have imagined existed. And I think that that is something that, at least, and I will say, full disclosure, in my experience, is something that in music it makes it truly unique. And I think it's really hard to disregard that, because the power of music is something that, as humans, we should be proud of, because it's something that, to our knowledge, no other species really has. The closest thing we have is whale songs, and that's not even proper music. It's actually just them talking.
Well,
So,
I have more stuff to argue with you on this about that, but we are out of time. So this might be something that we continue to explore in further installments, and I do actually want to explore the idea of music as a language more, because there's stuff that I wanted to talk about that we didn't, but because we got distracted with this discussion. But yeah, I mean, if listeners have thoughts, uh, type them up in the comment section, or contact us directly. We love to hear from you. And what you think about this issue, if you have any other insights to share with us. So with that, I think that's all for this week. Right?
yeah, that's it. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, do let us know. What do you think? Is music a language? We'll probably revisit this topic. I don't want to revisit immediately. We'll probably revisit it sometime after the new year. Uh, all that stuff. But yeah, it's a pretty thick topic. We've been wanting to do it for a while, but we kept having, I guess, just more upcoming news related discussions that we just couldn't get away from. So, yeah. How long has this been on the dock, by the way? I want to say it's been at least a month.
Several weeks.
It's probably been about a month.
Well, Zach, I didn't even get to arguing with you.
Yeah, I know. I see your other points. Yeah. Yeah. So we will revisit this topic again, but after we get some thoughts from you guys, and once because we both said a lot of things that I'm gonna think about a bit about what Jacob said. He's probably gonna think about things I said, or ways to assassinate me. Whatever. But
assassinate your argument. We don't do ad hominems here on Composer Talk.
Or do we? Next week on Composer Talk, find out where the body is. All right. Speaking of hiding bodies, I need to go hide one myself. So have a Merry Christmas. There will be a Composer Talk next week. It might be a little late because I'm actually going to be on the road Wednesday morning. But I should be here in time for Composer Talk. If it isn't at its usual time, I will make sure that there's a post saying, okay, it's going to be 30 minutes or an hour late, and we'll roll from there. And yeah, and we'll figure out something with the video. Sorry you guys couldn't see him, but he was wearing the same hoodie.
It's my favorite hoodie.
Yeah, I know, you wear it literally every day these days.
Not every day, but many days. Well, with that said, we'll see you or hear from you later. Send us your hate mail. We love to receive it.
Or not hate mail.
Next week.
Yeah. All right. See you later. Thanks for joining us for Composer Talk.